Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we are on lesson 44 of the Gospel of Luke, and we're covering Luke chapter 19, verses 28 through 48. This one's called the Triumphal Entry. Cloaks and palm branches lined the ground, with Jesus riding down the Palm Sunday road on the foal of a donkey. Not on a horse as a warrior or a conquering king. Jesus came in humbleness and remained humble all the way to the end. He knows exactly what is going to happen and knows exactly when. Unlike Jesus, as we approach death, most fear the unknown. Will the pain be more than I can handle? Will I be scared? Will I be alone? People also have thoughts concerning what they wish they could change. I think most of us spend too much time looking back instead of looking forward. Jesus would be returning to heaven, which is quite different from going there for the first time. He knows that he will soon be, once again, in the presence of the Father, back in a place of perfection. He also knows that the next time he comes to earth, there will be a different triumphal entry, when the Son of God will enter the gates of Jerusalem to rule and reign here for 1,000 years as the King of Glory, as prophesied in Psalm 24. Let's read our first passage today. Luke chapter 19, verses 28 through 40 says this. When he had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. And it came to pass when he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany at the mountain called Olivet, that he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, Go into the village opposite you, where as you enter you will find a colt tied on which no one has ever sat. Loose it and bring it here. And if anyone asks you, Why are you loosing it? Thus you shall say to him, Because the Lord has need of it. So those who were sent went their way and found it just as he had said to them. But as they were loosing the colt, the owners of it said to them, Why are you loosing the colt? And they said, The Lord has need of him. Then they brought him to Jesus, and they threw their own clothes on the colt, and they set Jesus on him, and as he went, many spread their clothes on the road. Then as he was now drawing near the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works they had seen, saying, Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And some of the Pharisees called to him from the crowd, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. But he answered and said to them, I tell you that if these should keep silent, the stones would immediately cry out. This is a significant event that is covered in all 4 of the Gospels. There are not many events covered in all 4. The feeding of the 5,000 comes to mind, along with the trial, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus. In my lessons concerning the triumphal entry in both Matthew and Mark, I have gone into much detail explaining this event through the eyes of a Scotland Yard detective by the name of Sir Robert Anderson. In Anderson's book, The Coming Prince, first published in 1894, he explained that the exact date of this event was identified by the prophet Daniel around 167 BC. Anderson explained that there would be exactly 173,880 days between the edict of Artaxerxes to rebuild Jerusalem, including the walls, in 445 BC, until Jesus was acknowledged as king, riding down that Palm Sunday road a week before his crucifixion, based on these prophetic verses from Daniel. Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 25 says this. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 70 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. This was the pinnacle of the ministry of Jesus, but it was short-lived. Yes, these people called out the exact words prophetically stated by King David in Psalm 118:26. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But those words had been spoken by mouths, not hearts. Again, the fickle mob yearned to be free from Roman rule, and they wanted a conquering king, not the Son of God. Earlier in this chapter, in verse 11, we read this. Now as they heard these things, he spoke another parable because he was near Jerusalem, and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. The Greek word used for appear is anaphaino, and was used when something appeared instantly, like land seen from a ship, growing bigger with the curve of the earth on the horizon. Once they acknowledged Jesus as king, the people thought he would become the conquering king they had anticipated immediately. But to them, nothing changed in the coming days, though he did upend the tables of the money changers at the temple for defiling his father's house. The same group of people who acknowledged Jesus as king were likely in the mob calling for his crucifixion a week later. It is heartbreaking to think of the length and breadth Jesus was willing to go to for mankind. We cannot really grasp what it involved to become lower than the angels and become a man, nor what it was like to leave heaven to be born on a planet governed by Satan. God is holy and must punish even one's sin, and Jesus chose to spend a life on an earth where sin is pervasive. And then he would be killed by the people he came to save. But we also can see the other side of the coin. While one side is heartbreaking, the other side is exhilarating. Never forget that the crucifixion was not something that was done to Jesus. He came for this reason. It was his plan to allow it to happen. That does not mean that man did not play a part in the death of Jesus, as well as the rejection of Jesus, but what we have gained because of the crucifixion of Jesus is worth everything. God the Father feels that way too. As Isaiah 53 reminds us, yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. The Pharisees were offended by these repeated cries from the mob, restating the psalm as the people were acknowledging Jesus as Messiah. They demanded that Jesus rebuke these people, and Jesus said that if the people were silent, even the rocks would cry out. When I walked down the Palm Sunday road, I picked up a handful of rocks and brought them home. Perhaps those were some of the rocks that would have cried out. But perhaps Jesus was referring to much larger rocks that were nearby, the foundation stones of the temple. Some of those stones weighed over 500 tons. Now that would have been a rock concert. I would have loved to hear. Let's read the next passage. Luke chapter 19, verses 41 through 44 says this. Now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you, and close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you to the ground, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation. There are 3 passages in the Bible that tell us of the tears of Jesus. The first is at the tomb of Lazarus, and that one always has surprised me a bit. Jesus cries for his deceased friend, knowing that momentarily he will resurrect Lazarus. I've tried to think of the reason for the tears of Jesus. It's likely empathy for what the family of Lazarus is enduring. Jesus loved Mary and Martha and knew how they were grieving. But before Jesus was resurrected and took the souls destined for heaven from Abraham's bosom to their heavenly home, death could have been more difficult than we know. But I tend to attach the tears of Jesus to these prophetic words from Isaiah. Isaiah 53 verse 3 says, "He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him." We also can see in Hebrews that Jesus cried when praying to the Father in anticipation of the cross. And it is easy to think this occurred when Jesus was sweating blood, knowing what was to occur shortly. Hebrews chapter 5 verses 7 through 9 says this, "Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. Though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him." And the third time we read about the tears of Jesus is in this passage today. Jesus wept over Jerusalem. These were not selfish tears from being rejected. Jesus cried for what these people were missing. Their rejection of the Messiah would have far-reaching consequences. This passage tells us that their eyes would be blinded, and specifically states the reason, because they did not know the time of their visitation. The Old Testament prophecies made the identification of Jesus as Messiah clear. Jesus fulfilled all the prophecies. The first consequence would be spiritual blindness, and the next consequence would occur in 70 AD when the Romans would destroy Jerusalem and the temple. Many Jews would be killed, many others enslaved, and the rest sent away from the land God had given them. The third consequence would be that the spiritual blindness would last for centuries. Many Christians cannot understand why the Jews cannot see Jesus as the Messiah, even today. And it is because God has blinded them from seeing Jesus as Messiah. Sadly, what that means is that the vast majority of all Jews born since the time of Jesus are destined for hell, as the only way to the Father is through Jesus. That blindness will be removed in the Great Tribulation. And Amos tells us that 1/3 of the Jews alive in that time will once again call out those prophetic words uttered on the Palm Sunday road, Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai, and Jesus will return. Those words announced his acknowledgement as king, and those words also will announce his second coming. Let's read the last passage today. Luke chapter 19, verses 45 through 48 says this, "Then he went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in it, saying to them, 'It is written, my house is a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves.' And he was teaching daily in the temple, but the chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people sought to destroy him and were unable to do anything, for all the people were very attentive to hear him." I have read that Annas, once the high priest of the Sanhedrin, started a family business with money changers and the sales of sacrificial animals at the temple. By the law of Moses, the high priest was a lifetime position, but somehow with Annas and his family members, this had changed as well. Caiaphas, the high priest of the Sanhedrin, when Jesus was crucified, was the son-in-law of Annas. Josephus also mentions 5 different sons of Annas who also became high priests. It had become a financially lucrative position. In the Old Testament, God set aside the tribe of the Levites to work at the tabernacle, and instead of inheriting land, the inheritance of the Levites was in the Lord. Today we see many church positions created through nepotism, and often These appointments are no better than the sons of Eli, described as worthless in 1 Samuel 2:12. Jesus called attention to the fact that the temple had once been a house of prayer, but had become a den of thieves. These vendors were stealing from the Lord and also were stealing from the poor. Remember, particularly during feast weeks and Passover was approaching, many travelers would come into Jerusalem. They could purchase animals for sacrifices, but these vendors were increasing the prices. The same thing was occurring with the exchange rate. We can think how offended we get when there is a natural disaster like the floods in the North Carolina mountains beginning in late September of 2024, and vendors charge exorbitant prices and take advantage. If they paid 10 cents for a bottle of water and sell that same bottle of water for $5, it demonstrates greed. That is what Jesus saw at the temple. But we can add another level to this because it was the place of God. Jesus was angry at these offenses against his Father. As this passage ends, we can see a momentary divide between the Jewish people and the Jewish leadership. The people wanted to hear Jesus, while the chief priests, scribes, and other Jewish religious authorities wanted to kill him. As stated in an earlier lesson, Passion Week, the week before the crucifixion, gives us no information concerning people being saved by Jesus. Instead, this is a week of spiritual darkness. But Jesus does not stop offering that salvation. He has not stopped offering that same salvation today either. Picture a man on an ocean liner who falls overboard and is fortunate to have another boat come along and offer to save him. But even though he is in the middle of the ocean and has no chance of saving himself, he tells those on the ship he is not interested. That is the plight of those who ignore the pleas of Jesus, who pass on his invitation. There's only one other way that this is going to end. Not making a decision for Jesus is making a decision. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.